Yashodanam Nanam Raja Janaram Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So today we will discuss Canto 3, Chapter 9, Text 23. Text 23. Esha Prapanna Varado Ramayatma Shakya Sa Esha Prapanna Varado Ramayatma Shakya Yad Kadashiti Grihita Gunavatara Yad Kadashyati Grihita Gunavatara Tasmin Svavikramam Idam Srijito Pi Cheto Tasmin Svavikramam Idam Srijito Pi Cheto Yunjita Karma Shamalam Cha Yatha Vijahyam Yunjita Karma Samalam Yatha Yunjita Karma Shamalam Cha Yatha Vijahyam Esha Prapanno Varado Ramayatma Shakya Yad Karishyati Grihita Gunavatara Tasmin Svavikramam Idam Srijito Vicheto Yunjita Karma Shamalam Cha Yatha Vijahyam Esha Prapanna Varado Ramayatma Shakya Yad Karishyati Grihita Gunavatara Tasmin Svavikramam Idam Srijito Picheto Yunjita Karma Shamalam Cha Yatha Vijahyam
Isha Prapana Varado Ramayatma Shakya Yat Karishyati Grihita Gunavatara Tasmin Svavikramam Idam Shri Jato Picheto Esha Prabhana Varado Ramayatma Shakya.
Yat Yat Vishakti Vitaguna Tara.
Yat Yat Prashati Vinatagunavara.
Tasman Savikam Idam Shachito Vicheto.
Tasmin Svavikramamidam Chittato Vicheto.
Yunjita Kama Shamalam Jayata Vijayam.
Yunjita Karma Shamalam Jayata Vijayam.
Esha Prabhana Varado Ramayatma Shakya.
Esha Prabhana Varado Ramayatma Shakya.
Yat Karisya Divivita Gunadvartayatma.
Yat Yat Karishati Vinatagunavavatara.
Ashmin Svavikramamidam Shirato Vicheto.
Tasmin Svavikramamidam Srajato Vicheto.
Yunjita Karma Shamalam Chayata Vijayam.
Yunjita Karma Shamalam Jayata Vijayam.
Isha Prabhana Varado Ramayatma Shakya.
Esha Prabhana Varado Ramayatma Shakya.
Yad Yad Karasyati Vita Gunavatara.
Yat Yat Karishati Vinatagunavattara.
Tasmin Svavikramamidam Srijato Vicheto.
Tasmin Svavikramamidam Srajato Vicheto.
Yunjita Karma Shamalam Chayata Vijayam.
Yunjita Karma Shamalam Jayata Vijayam.
Synonyms. Esha,
Esha,
this.
this.
Prapanna,
Prapanna,
one who is surrendered.
one who is surrendered.
Varadaha,
Varadaha,
benefactor.
benefactor.
Ramaya,
Ramaya,
enjoying always with the goddess of fortune Lakshmi.
enjoying always with goddess of fortune Lakshmi.
Atma Shaktya,
Atma-shakya,
his internal potency.
his internal potency.
Yet,
Yat Yat,
whatever.
whatever.
Karishyati,
Kadishyati,
he may act.
he may act.
Grihita,
Gridita,
accepting.
accepting.
Guna Avatara,
Guna-avatara,
incarnation in the mode of goodness.
incarnation of the mode of goodness.
Tasmin,
Tasmin,
unto him.
unto him.
Svavikramam,
Svavikramam,
with omnipotency.
omnipotency.
Idam,
Idam,
this cosmic manifestation.
this cosmic manifestation.
Surajitaha,
Sriraha,
creating.
creating.
Api,
Api,
in spite of.
in spite of.
Chetaha,
Chetaha,
heart.
heart.
Yunjita,
Yunjita,
be engaged.
be engaged.
Karma,
Karma,
work.
work.
Shamalam,
Shamalam,
material affection.
material affection.
Cha,
Cha,
also.
also.
Yatha,
Yatha,
as much as.
Vijayam,
Vijayam, I can give up.
I can give up.
Translation. The Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, is always the benefactor of the surrendered souls. His activities are always enacted through his internal potency, Rama, or the goddess of fortune. I pray only to engage in his service in the creation of the material world, and I pray that I may not be materially affected by my works, for thus I may be able to give up the false prestige of being the creator. Responsibly, please. The Supreme Lord, personality of Godhead, is always the benefactor of the surrendered souls. His activities are always enacted through his internal potency, Rama, or the goddess of fortune. I pray only to engage in his service
I pray only to engage in his service
in the creation of the material world,
in the creation of the material world.
and I pray that I may not be materially affected
And I pray that I am not materially affected
by my works,
by my works,
for thus I may be able to give up the false prestige of being the creator. Srila Prabhupada's purport. In the matter of material creation, maintenance, and destruction, there are three incarnations of the material modes of nature: Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshvara. But the Lord's incarnation is Vishnu, and his internal potency is the supreme energy for the total activities. Brahma, who is only an assistant in the modes of creation, wanted to remain in his actual position as an instrument of the Lord, instead of becoming puffed up by the false prestige of thinking himself the creator. That is the way of becoming dear to the Supreme Lord and receiving his benediction. Foolish men want to take credit for all creations made by them, but intelligent persons know very well that not a blade of grass can move without the will of the Lord. Thus, all the credit for wonderful creations must go to him. By spiritual consciousness only can one be freed from the material affection and receive benedictions offered by the Lord. Om Madhyanatimidantasya Vyanjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Mungum Langhayate Jakrapatamaham Bande Shri Gurun Dinataram Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Yudati Swapadantikam Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripasindhobhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo. Just want to thank everybody for coming. This is a beautiful house. There have been times over the last couple of years where the house hasn't been so full for Srimad Bhagavatam class. I think we have more devotees in the room right now than we have deities in the other room, which is cool. And it's cool when it's like that for Mangalarti too. What did you count the other day, Kusha, for Mangalarti? 15? I think that's more
And then
than
one
that.
time 70.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. This is inspiring, it's enlightening. Esha prapanda varado ramayatma shakya yat karishyati grahita gunavatara. Tasmin svavikramamidam surjato vicheto yunjita karma shamalam chagyata vijahyam. The Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, is always the benefactor of the surrendered souls. His activities are always enacted through the internal potency, Brahma, or the goddess of fortune. I pray only to engage in his service in the creation of the material world, and I pray that I may not be materially affected by my works, for thus I may be able to give up the false prestige of being the creator. So, a couple things right in the verse. So the first thing is, Esha Prapanda Vadado. So Esha Prapanda Vadada. That Krishna gives all his blessings to those souls who are surrendered. So who can help me with how bad I am with lists? Who can help me with the list of the 6 angas of Sharanagati? First one, anybody? English or Bengali or Sanskrit or whatever. To accept things that are favorable for bhakti, What's the next one? Thank you. And then,
To live in a holy place is one of them.
nope.
Nope. I guess it would be Dashmita is.
That's one of the Angas, 64 Angas of Bhakti.
Like association.
Well, accepting things that are favorable, rejecting things that are unfavorable for the culture of Bhakti. To understand, to be convinced that the Lord will protect us in all circumstances, and to accept the Lord as our sole maintainer, to feel oneself meek and humble in the face of the Lord, and Atmanikshepa, complete self-surrender, rejecting all kinds of self-interest. As Prabhupada often puts it, to have no interest other than the interest of the Lord. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in I guess it's an introductory song to his collection of songs on Sharanagati, the way of taking shelter of the Lord, he says, I can't remember the Bengali right now. As Radhesh would say, it's running away from me. But he says that Krishna answers the prayers, Krishna fulfills the prayers of those who have accepted these 6 angas of Sharanagati. So sometimes when you get on social media and somebody says, please pray for my dear mother who's ill with cancer or giving up her body or something like that, you can understand these are people asking you, first of all, to take shelter of the Lord. Because Krishna hears the prayers of those who have. There was I think I've mentioned this before, and I apologize if it's been too recently. When I was a kid, my dad often went to New York in business, and he would take my mother with him, and they would go to a Broadway musical, and then he would bring back the album, and so we had these like stacks of albums of the cast renditions of the original cast renditions of all these Broadway musicals. In early 60s, there was one called The Unsinkable Molly Brown, about a dirt poor woman who became wealthy because she married a guy who became a successful silver miner in Colorado. And because she was rich, she took a trip to England, and then she was coming back from England on a very famous ocean liner called the Titanic, which was touted as being unsinkable. And the first thing that happened was the boat sank. So therefore the unsinkable Molly Brown. So, because she survived and prevailed. So, she was a pretty strong spirit, I guess. So, there's one song in there, I don't remember the context anymore, but about, you said you think your prayers haven't been answered. And so he says, you pray for riches, one line says, you pray for riches and glory, and he turns around and he makes you humble. But it's the humble and the meek who inherit the kingdom. But one line that really struck me, even when I was a kid, if you think your prayers haven't been answered, she says, you got your answer. The answer was no. Because sometimes that's just how it is. But for those who are surrendered, Krishna is very eager to give his blessings. And then Brahma says his activities are always enacted through his internal potency, Brahma, the goddess of fortune. So this is quite an interesting thing. I mean, what he's pointing out here, because he's praying to Krishna. And he's acknowledging that his activities, or that Krishna's own activities, the Lord's own activities, are always under the control of the spiritual energy, his internal potency, his Hladini Shakti. And so they're completely separate, completely apart from whatever we can conceive of. And we get a glimpse of that in other prayers we hear from Brahma, such as in the Brahma Samhita, or in the 10th canto in the Brahma Stotra in the 14th chapter, which I'll take a quick look at in a minute. And then he gets down to business. So we noted that yesterday he began to offer kind of a petition. May he be merciful toward me, that I, as before, may be empowered with the introspection to create. For I am also one of the surrendered souls who are dear to the Lord. And then he says, and those surrendered souls, they always get Krishna's blessings. So I'm going to count myself among them. So now he says, I pray only to engage in his service in the creation of the material world. I want to do this only in service to the Lord. This is completely an offering to the Lord. And it's not some kind of indirect service, it's directly the service that's been given to him by the Lord, right? So I want to do this simply as an act of service so that I won't be materially affected, so my head won't be turned by what I've done. I won't become full of myself by this. And therefore, I'll be able to give up the false prestige of being the creator. So Srila Prabhupada points out that Brahma, he's praying to continue to see himself, as Prabhupada puts it, as only an assistant in the modes of creation, wanting to remain in his actual position as an instrument of the Lord, instead of thinking, I did this. How do you say that in Sanskrit? I did this? Or I made this? I heard it.
Something.
Ahamkara. Right?
Yeah.
Ahamkara. There used to be a sitcom in the 80s. Don't want to evoke it by saying its name. But at the end of the credits, they had like the stamp or the logo or whatever of the production company, which had something named Ulu or something like that. But then there was a little kid's voice that said, I made this. And every time we watched it, I would say, yep, here we are, Ahamkara. This is my false ego. I did this. And we become really proud. I become really proud. I've become a little proud. If I go in to clean the bathroom and it's pretty clean. I'm a little full of myself. I mean, true story. 50 odd years ago when I moved into the temple, the brahmacharis, there were only maybe 5 of us, I guess, 4 or 5 brahmacharis at the time, 4 of us at the time. But we shared a half bathroom and we bathed outside with a garden hose. And as soon as I moved into the temple, I volunteered to keep, especially as more and more devotees moved into the temple, I volunteered to clean that keep that hall bathroom clean, half bathroom clean, for a couple of reasons. One, I knew how to clean bathrooms. My parents trained me to clean bathrooms, and I got even better training in the Navy. We had to keep the bathrooms in the Navy, the heads in the bathroom, immaculate. There was a second reason, an ulterior motive. I wanted everyone to recognize how humble I am. However, I was actually quickly rewarded perfectly because in August of 1970, Srila Prabhupada came through Honolulu on his way to Japan and India. He only stayed overnight, but he came to the temple and gave a lecture that evening. And speaking of not having a false ego invested in something, I remember the women were upholstering the Vyasasana, and they finished it, 10-15 minutes before Srila Prabhupada arrived, which makes it clear that this is one of those spiritual things.
Yeah.
Krishna pulled this one off. We couldn't possibly have done it. Somehow or other, before Srila Prabhupada arrived, we got that last carpet tack in there, or whatever it was, So, so Srila Prabhupada came, he gave a lecture to an overpacked house, overflowing. We had people in the hall, down the stairs into the basement, in the basement, on the front porch, down the steps into the yard, and in the yard. We probably had 250, 300 people at that little house. And it was pretty amazing. And then during the kirtan, after the lecture, Srila Prabhupada excused himself to use the bathroom. And I knew the bathroom was sparkling clean. just thought, a little proud of myself because
I got to hold his bead bag.
So
Things, you know.
there's another story too that goes along with that, but with that same lecture. We had these, we back then we used to rig up these umbrellas. You'd get an umbrella at Long's or wherever, and then you put a gold lame on the bottom, red velvet on the top, and then you'd have beads on the seams, and we had this gold fringe around the edge. And we had this in the airport, and I carried it over, held it over Srila Prabhupada's head as we walked through the airport inside. But this is something you do to honor an important person, right? Even though there's no necessity of an umbrella. And after about halfway through the airport, he stopped for a moment, turned around and looked at me and gave me a big smile. However, there's another umbrella story. When in the temple, because we had just finished making the asana, so we hadn't had a chance to make an umbrella over the asana. So, like we have here. So one of the brahmacharis, the Vyasasana was on the shelf in a bay window opposite the altar. And one of the brahmacharis was kneeling next to the Vyasasana over in the bay window, holding the umbrella over Srila Prabhupada's head. And during the course of the lecture, Srila Prabhupada talked to him. When he looked up at the umbrella, he looked at the brahmachari, he looked at the umbrella again, and he looked back at the brahmachari, and he said, I don't think it will rain in here. So he excused the brahmachari to sit down and be a little more comfortable. So we become proud of these things, being able to clean, keep a bathroom clean or something like that, and we become a little full of ourselves. So Brahma is praying that this not happen to him, that he not get so full of himself that he would make some mistake. And then what happened? One day he made a mistake. He decided to challenge Krishna, check him out, just see how powerful this cute little kid was. And he got a real comeuppance, he had a real epiphany, had a real vision. Stole Krishna's cowherd boyfriends and his calves, stashed them somewhere, and then came back to check on the fun. Now, after a moment of his time, which was a year of our time, and he came back and he saw Krishna playing with his cowherd boyfriends and all the calves, sitting around munching on the tender grasses and things. He's just like, what? And then Krishna did all this kind of magic stuff. Turned himself and all the calves and all the calves and the cowherd boys into Vishnu forms, and then they were being worshipped by Brahmas with more heads than our Brahma has. And Brahma's just like completely bewildered. This is why it's called the Brahma Vimohana Leela. He was completely bewildered by the whole show. So then, in the following chapter, this was the last chapter that Srila Prabhupada translated in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And in the next chapter, we have all these wonderful prayers, 50-odd verses of amazing prayers by Brahma, expressing his appreciation for Krishna. And one of them, he says, what am I? A small creature measuring 7 spans of my own hand. I'm enclosed in a pot-like universe composed of material nature, the total material energy, false ego, ether, air, water, and earth. And what is your glory? Unlimited universes pass through the pores of your body, just as particles of dust pass through the openings in the screened window. So he's realizing, I'm thinking I'm big shot. I'm thinking I'm the creator of the universe. I'm very powerful, but I've been put in my place. And so then, a few verses later, he says, to persons ignorant of your actual transcendental position, you appear as part of the material world. You appear as part of the material. You appear to be part of the material world, manifesting yourself by the expansion of your inconceivable energy. Thus, for the creation of the universe, you appear as me. For the creation of the universe, you appear as me. For its maintenance, you appear as yourself, Vishnu, and for its annihilation, you appear as Lord Trinitra, Shiva. So this echoes what Srila Prabhupada says in his purport. So this is, Brahma, the creator of the universe, the original person in the universe, most important, we read in a previous purport, person in the universe. Praying earnestly that praying earnestly that he not become too full of himself, because he's actually doing engaging in this act simply as an act of service to the Lord. So we can follow in Brahma's footsteps. We are his followers. We're part of his Anugatya, his following, his Sampradaya. And so we can also take instruction from his example that, if we do something that comes out cool, that if we've done it as an offering for the Lord, we understand that it's his energy that makes it possible, his inspiration that makes it possible. And then we don't become so attached to the results, not become full of false prestige because I made a nice lunch or a tree I planted now is giving all kinds of flowers for the deities or something. This is Krishna's mercy. We understand this. And we want, like Brahma, to simply, our aspiration is to simply remain servants, instruments in the Lord's work. So I'll stop there and entertain any comments or questions.
Mentions the second line of the translation about Brahma, the goddess of fortune. So is it the same as the Yogamaya, or?
Yeah, they're all different. They're all different expansions, different aspects of Radha, his ultimate internal potency. So, in a sense, yes. Rama is Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. She's Krishna's internal potency. She's an expansion of Radha. Yogamaya is an expansion of Radha. So, yeah, in a number of senses. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Grantaraja Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai.